Hello and welcome back to Morsels and Motors. In today's exciting video, I'm going to be having a look at this really rather wonderful Mark 1 Volkswagen Golf GTI. So this particular car is a 1983 Golf GTI. It is one of the last of the Mark 1 Golfs because the Mark 2 was released in 1984. You could get the GTI with a variety of engines over its lifetime, but this particular one is the 1.6 fuel-injected engine. This is the first time I've ever driven a Mark 1 Golf. In fact, it's the first time I've ever been in one, to be honest. So I'm really excited to show you around the car because that's what I love to do in my videos, is to have a really good look around the car and take them for a drive so you can get a really good feel as to what this sort of car is actually like. This car belongs to a channel subscriber called Mark, who has very kindly let me have a look around the car today and also, more excitingly, have a drive of it. So let's start as usual by having a really good look around the outside of the car. Although the Mark 1 Golf did have 4 or 5 door options from launch, the GTI only ever came in the Mark 1 as a 2-door style. And my favourite bit of a GTI is always this black surround around the rear screen, because it really kind of identifies it as a GTI as opposed to a Bogo basic or standard version of the Golf. I was driving behind this car earlier and it is just iconic. Those lines from the back, the big mud flaps, those rear light clusters, although these are the later ones, not the smaller ones that it was launched with initially. But the thing that really struck me about this car from behind is how absolutely tiny it is compared to today's cars. If you notice, that number plate is a standard size number plate, and either side of it is probably only just about another number plate's width on both sides for the light clusters, and yet it was passed by a modern Fiat 500 which looked absolutely enormous. It just dwarfs the Golf. The svelte Giugiaro styled lines of the Mark 1 Golf really are iconic, and it has stood the test of time so much. You know a Mark 1 Golf the moment you see the silhouette, and the silhouette of the Golf has obviously morphed over the decades, but the original is still probably the best example. It is of course very 70s with its really crisp angular lines. It's very, very boxy, but that was exactly what the style and fashion was in 1974. Giugiaro had designed this car to be absolutely the pinnacle of what the mid-70s stood for in car design, and it made absolutely everything else look fat, bloated and old-fashioned. The very fact that it's a hatchback is unusual and cutting edge for the early to mid-70s. And for Volkswagen, the fact that it's front-wheel drive and water-cooled also is a huge leap from what came before. One of the things you really notice about the silhouette of the Mark 1 Golf is that you have fixed quarter lights with the rear view mirrors mounted at the level of the quarter light, which doesn't give the world's best visibility, to be honest. It does feel rather silly from inside to have the mirrors so close to you. But I do feel like if they were placed in what would essentially be the correct place, whether it would change the lines and change the kind of desirability of them, I don't know. I'm sure someone's done it. I'd be interested to see. This particular car is fitted with these multi-spoke alloy wheels. They are known as the tarantula wheels for, I think, obvious reasons. Later Golfs like this one have plastic bumpers as well, rather than the thinner, smaller metal affairs that the earlier versions of the Golf had. The GTI, of course, gives you a under-valance spoiler. Of course, for me, the most important aspect of a Golf GTI is this red line around the front grille, the GTI badge and that blacked out Volkswagen symbol. It just makes the GTI for me. It's a neatly proportioned car, isn't it? Especially in 3-door guise. I love how the wiper sits on the left side of the screen there. It's just there. Kind of unashamedly, I'm a windscreen wiper. These door handles are the absolute classic Volkswagen door handles from the 1970s and 80s, aren't they? Which are a fixed handle, the key goes in there, and then there's a little pull inside there that you pull to open the door. Which reveals a very plain black vinyl door card with actually plenty of body-coloured metal on show, which is really quite surprising for what is supposed to be a pretty upmarket, sporty version of a car. Looking at the door card itself, we've got to start with a very small, quite delicate window winder. We've got remote adjustment for the door mirrors, which is very exciting. We've got a quite nice kind of armrest. It's kind of a padded vinyl, although it's reasonably quite hard, with a door pull attached to it. And obviously then there's the handle inside, which I'm told is shared with the Porsche of around the same time. This car's been fitted with an aftermarket pair of speakers on the vinyl door cards there, but there is, I think, space for a factory speaker there on the door pocket, of which there is a very small door pocket, just enough space to hold some of the documentation for the car and the service booklets, which are really rather lovely and include some old tax discs. And we even have the original tax disc holder from the dealer, although it's in very, very poor shape, poor thing. And we have the service schedule for it, and that's the original owner who bought it. And we have lots and lots of, somewhere in here, I saw them a moment ago, there we go, lots and lots of service stamps from the first sort of 20 odd years of its life, which is lovely to see. Moving on inside the cabin, and you cannot fail to be impressed by these rather nice Recaro seats, trimmed at the edges in black and in the centre with this multicoloured sort of rainbow, but only the very top colours of the rainbow, the reds, oranges and sort of yellowy colours. They are really rather special. This car has the original fabric, so you can see that it's faded a little bit at the edges. Particularly on the back seats you can see some fading, but I think that adds to its charm, because I think if you were to retrim it with brand new version of this fabric, it would really, I think it would sing a bit too much. It would just be too bright to give the car its due for being, 40 years old. Looking at the dashboard of the Golf Mark 1, this is the facelift dashboard for the Golf, so it's a much more sculpted design than the original dash the Golf had, and I think it suits the car's lines better than the original dashboard, but then that's just sort of personal preferences, I suspect. Let's step inside and have a proper look at it. So starting on the passenger side, and usually we've got a glove box here that opens by squeezing those buttons up, and then it opens upwards like that. Not the world's biggest glove box, but it certainly isn't the smallest one either, particularly given the fact that you have a little storage shelf below there, and also below the driver's knees there as well, and even above the centre console. That feels quite fragile. I don't want to slam it, but it's sort of spring-loaded, so it sort of just shuts itself quite firmly. So sitting in the driver's seat, let's have a look what sort of equipment we've got. Let's start off with this rather nice, it's a padded steering wheel, it's a 4-spoke with 4 horns, which is quite fun. Obviously says GTI there, just in case you weren't sure that's what you were driving. It's nice and quite chunky for an early 80s steering wheel, certainly for a 70s car, which is what this is. And yeah, it's nicely padded. Looking down on the right hand side of the dashboard, we've got quite a large air vent, we've got a fixed one there for the side windows. And then we come to the instrument cluster, which is classic 1980s Volkswagen with the speedo on the left, the rev counter on the right hand side, and then we have these LED warning lights in the middle, which are on obviously the Mark 1 Golfs, the Mark 2 Polos and several other Volkswagens of this generation. They really are super fun. We have a digital clock, which is great, very, very modern and swishy, and I'm sure that wouldn't be in the basey kind of models. You get a temperature gauge up at the top there and a fuel gauge down there, so very limited amounts of display equipment. On the right hand side we've got at the top it's a rear stat, then we've got the light switch, so we flick it sort of halfway for side lights and then all the way for your main lights on. Those are some warning lights to say that your handbrake is on. Why they couldn't put it in the middle warning lights I'm not entirely sure. I think it must be a bit of an afterthought. On the right hand side here we've got the rear fog lights, we've got the heated rear window, and we have the hazard warning lights. Let's move to the centre console, and we have the radio up here in what I think is the best position for any car to have a radio, because your hand is right here on the steering wheel and you literally have to just move it a couple of centimetres away to press fast forward or whatever it is on your tape player. I think it's a real safety issue for me, because a lot of cars have them radios buried down there and you have to take your hands off the steering wheel really far and eyes off the road to go and deal with it, and I really don't like that. Below the radio we have some very simple heater controls. We've got a knob there for the fan that's 3-speed, and then we've got heat, hot, cold, and then we've got sort of direction of the heat, so whether that's into the centre vents, the floor there, or the windscreen there. Below that, it's the 80s. We of course have an ashtray and a cigar lighter or a cigarette lighter, depending on what the brochure might call it. Little cubby hole, and then below then we've got a few extra gauges, though 2 of them are blanked off, and the middle one I think is probably a oil temperature or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, neither is the owner. Looking down the floor of the car, we have a 5-speed manual gearbox with, of course, the iconic golf ball knob there. That is only on the GTI Golfs and really helps give it that little sporty image. Behind the gear stick we have a very conventional handbrake, which just about has a little bit of a plasticky surround to it. And then we have these rather fabulous seatbelt buckles, which are huge big seatbelt buckles with the button kind of offset to the side rather than being kind of right there where they would normally be, right next to where you're putting your seatbelt. Right, let's have a look in the back and have a seat in the back, shall we? So we've got a little tilty catch thing on the seat, which tilts the seat forwards. And here I am in the back. It's all right. There's not a lot here. Legroom is adequate behind me, but I think behind perhaps a taller driver it would be a little bit of a squeeze. The GTI gets dark grey charcoal coloured headlining, which, because there's so much glass in the car, doesn't actually make it as dark as it would be in a more modern car. There is quite a lot of black in here, but it doesn't feel too austere, surprisingly so, especially in the back here, because you have the huge rear windscreen right behind you, so that you have quite a lot of light and vision in here as a rear passenger. You also get these very classic Volkswagen kind of vinyl strip as a grab handle, which I think is right at a nice nod back to the Beetle, which also had these. In terms of equipment in the rear, well, we have an ashtray, of course, on one side here, very lovely. We have some vinyl kind of door, I don't know what you'd call these, kind of vinyl trim here, with a little bit of an armrest there on both sides. I think there are some speakers there in the C-pillar panels, but that brings us to the boot, so let's go and have a look at that. To open the boot we actually have a push button, which is very exciting for a 1980s car. Quite often you do have to enter the key in the lock. Boot lifts out of the way nice and high. We have a parcel shelf, and I initially thought that this parcel shelf was broken, but no, because you can see that it's kind of not attached there. But no, the owner tells me that it is actually attached to the backrest of the back seat there, which is a fact I never knew about the Mark 1 Golf, which means that it sort of floats about this parcel shelf, which I think does look like it's broken, but it is meant to be like that. But the good thing about it is that it's therefore very easy to just detach from the boot strings, and you just fold the seat forwards and it kind of folds flat with the backrest on the seat, sort of making a bit of a boot floor, which is quite nice. Inside the boot we have a lot of body-coloured metal on show, which again betrays the 70s roots of this car. Most 70s cars have naked sides of the wheel arches, but this car is in very nice condition, as you can see. Great big sort of girders here, which I did not expect to see. It looks very chunky and strong. The boot itself is, it's got quite a high load lip. Hatchback was a new design, and they hadn't quite worked out that you could, hatch it all the way down to where the number plate is, or below the number plate where the bumper is, as you do on later cars. This kind of adds to the stability and stiffness of the body, having a smaller opening, but it does mean that for loading kind of big bulky items, you still have a huge lip to get over. But it's it's a pioneer of its class, to be honest, so you have to forgive it for getting a few things wrong. Boot's a decent size, but it's not huge, it's deep, and it goes back a reasonable amount, but yeah, by today's standards, it's not the world's biggest boot. But again, the whole car, by today's standards, is really not that large. And I think that's what struck me most about this car and the time I've spent with it, is that how small it is compared to everything else that's on the road. People in the 70s and 80s drove around family cars this size all the time, and it was perfectly normal and perfectly acceptable, and no one thought they needed any more space. You had five people in a family and all their luggage would go on holiday in a Mark 1 Golf, and people wouldn't think it was crazy. Whereas, nowadays it's, you need to have a Volvo XC60, as is about to drive past, to be considered to be a normal-sized family car. And I have a Volvo XC60, and I struggle to get luggage in the back of that, even though it's huge. So, yeah, times move on, but isn't necessarily a good way, I'm not sure, because this drives really rather nicely, and I think we need to get it on the road and see what it is like to drive a 40-year-old sporty car in 2024. When I did my look around the car a minute ago, I forgot to talk about the stalks. They are really diddy. but they're beautifully positioned just where you want them. The right hand side one is higher up than the left hand side one, which is nice and low down here, just where you need it for the indicator. I really like it. So my driving impressions, I've driven this before this little on camera bit, and so I've got a little bit more comfortable with it when I first step into it. It's quite heavy in terms of the controls, so the accelerator response, the steering, and even the gear change is kind of, it's not light and delicate. You're very aware that you're changing gear. But that all adds together to give you a very solid feel to the drive, which is exactly what the Golf is known for. So yes, the steering is heavy, but it means that it's super planted, very direct, and gives you a lot of feedback. The downside of that is that when you're trying to park it, you will end up with Popeye arms, which is the complaint of Mark, the owner, as well. We're cruising now at 60, well, an indicated 60, which is probably a little bit less than that, in fifth. The refinement is, I would say it's acceptable. It's of its time. I have been in more refined cars. So my Cavalier, for example, which is the same year as this, an 83, but obviously is a much newer design than this. And it's also the class above. So you would expect it to have a bit more kind of bells and whistles in terms of refinement. This still has, you know, body coloured metal and that kind of thing, and presumably hasn't got the world's biggest amount of soundproofing. But then again, that adds to the character of the car, because it's a sporty car, so you kind of want to be a bit more connected with the world. You want to be able to hear what's going on around you and feel what's going on around you a little bit, I think. And we've been chatting about cars at 60 miles an hour, and it's perfectly fine. You know, you're not having to raise your voice too much. Something that really surprised me when I first got into the car, you sit quite low, the dash is quite high, and the windscreen is actually very kind of steep. It's very flat in a way that I wasn't expecting. It actually reminds me a lot more of a Beetle than I was expecting it to do so. You kind of sit quite close, it's quite a tall car, and with that windscreen being, again, quite a tall vertical windscreen, it just kind of gave me that hint of a Beetle. But maybe that's just my knowing that that the DNA is Volkswagen, perhaps. We're accelerating out of a 40 zone there in fourth gear, and it really does pick up quite nicely. It's got just the right amount of power. It's not got too much power, and it's not got too little power. But I have noticed that you have to work the gears quite hard in this car. The engine is not massively torquey. It gives you its power by kind of raw horsepower rather than torque. So you really are having to change down quite a lot when you're perhaps going around a corner and you want to kind of get a little bit of go coming out of the corner. But it's fine, it's just something you have to get used to. The other thing you have to get used to as I'm slowing down for a corner is the brakes. The Mark 1 Golf is renowned for having, in right-hand drive form, no brake servo. And yeah, it really doesn't. It just has a little bar going all the way over to the brake system on the other side of the car. And it does work really well, it's fine. You just have to be aware of it and be prepared to either stamp on it or, at the very least, plan your stopping a little bit further in advance than you would in a more modern car or an 80s car with a servo system. Of all my cars, I think that the closest to compare this to would be the Mark 1 Astra that I have, because the Astra was introduced by Opel in 1979, and their benchmark for that car was the Mark 1 Golf, which was 5 years old by the time that was released. Opel really wanted a front-wheel drive, svelte little hatchback, or in my case the Salute, that would compete with this class of car and really kind of move the game on a little bit. They wanted to better the Mark 1. Have they bettered it, in my opinion? I'm not sure. I think they're just different. The Astra feels a little bit bigger. It feels lighter in terms of the controls, certainly. The dash is smaller, so you kind of feel a little bit less sort of hemmed in. Oh, we need fourth gear now because we're coming out of a corner. I think it's a great little car to drive. It's so chuckable around the corners. It's so planted. It doesn't roll too much. And, oh yeah. You get a nice kick of power coming out of towns and villages like that. And it's really rather sweet, it's rather lovely. But I think it could bite if you weren't careful. I think it could bite you a little bit, particularly when with the brakes. But yes, I'm a fan, I like it. it's definitely one of those cases where you meet your heroes and you can feel its limitations, you accept its limitations, and you still enjoy it. So yeah, that's my overriding impression of this Mark 1 Golf GTI, and thank you very much to Mark, who's sitting in the passenger seat here, for letting me drive his car and put it through its paces a little bit, and also be slightly critical about it, but also be nice about it. You know, we have to be balanced on horses and motors. We're not entirely mean about everything. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of the Mark 1 Golf, and I will see you again in the next video driving something else, hopefully. One of your cars if you want to. Do kind of get in touch if you want me to drive your car and feature it on the channel. I'm based in Cambridge, so I can travel, you know, a reasonable distance from there to go and drive something fun. So do get in touch. Anyway, I will catch you in the next video. Goodbye.